Nnamdi Kanu won a significant legal victory in what is referred to as a trial within trial, where the court ruled that statements obtained from him by the Nigerian authorities were made under duress and in the absence of his legal counsel. Presiding Judge Omotosho ruled in Nnamdi Kanu's favor, rejecting all oral and written statements submitted by the prosecution that were allegedly made by Nnamdi Kanu, declaring them inadmissible in court. The judge confirmed that the statements were extracted while Nnamdi Kanu was denied access to his lawyer, which made them legally invalid. The court took 2 hours to reach the decision, despite initially stating that a 1-hour recess would be enough, leading to speculation that there may have been external pressures on the judge. Supporters of Nnamdi Kanu and Biafra activists celebrated the ruling, viewing it as a major milestone in their legal and political struggle. Skepticism remains among supporters, as some believe the ruling may be a strategic move by the Nigerian government to manipulate public perception, especially ahead of the 2027 elections. Social media reactions varied. While many expressed joy over the legal win, others warned against premature celebration, insisting the broader trial continues and cautioning that the government could still retaliate. There is concern about the lack of updates following the judge's ruling, prompting fears that the judge may have faced consequences or interference from higher authorities. Details of Nnamdi Kanu's poor treatment in detention emerged, including alleged torture, denial of food, and inhumane conditions, which further justified the court's rejection of the prosecution's evidence. The courtroom was tense that day, filled with an air of uncertainty and expectation. For many, it was more than just a day in court. It was a potential turning point in a long, painful saga that has gripped the attention of people across Nigeria and beyond. At the center of it all was Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, widely known by his followers as Onyedum Nnamdi Kanu. On that particular day, the court was to make a crucial ruling in what is known in legal terms as a trial within a trial. This is a special kind of legal procedure used to determine whether a piece of evidence, such as a confession or a statement made by a defendant, was obtained legally and voluntarily. The implications of this decision could not be overstated, as it had the potential to determine the direction and even the validity of the larger trial in which Nnamdi Kanu is being prosecuted by the federal government of Nigeria. It was Judge James Omotosho, a respected figure in Nigeria's judicial system, who was presiding over the case. In the days leading up to this ruling, supporters of Nnamdi Kanu were vocal in their demands for justice. They wanted the court to acknowledge what they claimed had been happening behind the scenes: systematic abuse, torture, and disregard for the rights of the accused. For them, this was not just about legal procedures, it was about human dignity, political identity, and justice denied for too long. The courtroom had been filled earlier in the day with both legal representatives and observers. The court had announced it would take a 1-hour recess to deliberate on the evidence. But that hour turned into 2, and during those long minutes, speculation started swirling. Was something wrong? Were there unseen forces influencing the pace or even the outcome of the judgment? People outside the courtroom started to grow anxious, especially as news filtered through that the court was taking longer than expected. Some whispered of political interference, others feared that the case might take a turn for the worse. But when Judge James Omotosho finally returned and delivered his judgment, the atmosphere changed dramatically. In a decision that sent waves of emotion through the room and far beyond the courtroom walls, Judge James Omotosho ruled that all statements, both oral and written, that were obtained from Nnamdi Kanu by the Nigerian authorities were inadmissible in court. According to the judge, the prosecution had failed to prove that these statements were made voluntarily and with access to legal counsel. In fact, the evidence showed that Nnamdi Kanu had been denied access to his lawyers during his interrogations and that he made those statements under duress. The judge's words were clear, firm, and delivered with the weight of the law behind them. These statements could not be used as evidence in this or any other proceeding. Immediately after the ruling, a wave of celebration broke out among the supporters of Nnamdi Kanu. Across social media platforms and in communities sympathetic to the Biafran cause, the ruling was hailed as a long overdue recognition of the abuses and irregularities that have characterized Nnamdi Kanu's legal ordeal. Videos surfaced showing people dancing, singing and shouting in joy. For the Biafran activists and followers of the indigenous people of Biafra, this was not just a small courtroom win, it was a moral and symbolic victory. But amid the celebration, there was also a measured sense of caution. Many supporters, while happy about the ruling, reminded each other not to get carried away. The broader trial was still ongoing. This ruling, important as it was, did not mean that Nnamdi Kanu was free. He remained in custody. He remained under trial. And the Nigerian government still had the legal power to appeal, present other evidence, or take the case in a new direction altogether. In fact, some of the voices most active in the celebration were also the ones urging calm. They reminded their followers that this victory could be part of a larger strategy by the Nigerian government. There were those who speculated that the decision to rule in Nnamdi Kanu's favor was a calculated political move. They feared that the government might be using this court ruling as a way to soften public opinion, especially with the 2027 general elections just around the corner. According to this line of thought, the ruling was not necessarily an act of justice, but rather a way to pacify a segment of the electorate, particularly people from the southeastern part of Nigeria, who have long felt marginalized and excluded from national affairs. Others were more suspicious still. They pointed out the strange delay in updates after the ruling. Hours passed with no new information about what was going to happen next. This was unusual, especially considering how closely the case was being followed and reported on. Some feared that Judge James Omotosho may have faced consequences for his ruling. They worried that he might have been pressured or even removed from the case altogether. There were even whispers of political interference at the highest level, possibly from the presidency itself. The transcript of a video from a popular YouTube channel known as Queen Capon Media captured the emotional roller coaster that so many people were experiencing. The speaker, clearly overwhelmed with emotion, walked listeners through the court's process and the implications of the judge's decision. She explained that while the court had initially promised only a 1-hour break, they took 2 hours to return. During that time, anxiety grew. When the ruling finally came, she described it as a big good news. Her voice carried a mix of relief, pride, and persistent skepticism. She reminded viewers that even though the judge had rejected the evidence from the prosecution, the battle was far from over. Nnamdi Kanu was still not free, and the trial was not yet finished. What stood out most in that video, and in the countless reactions online, was the deep connection that many people feel to this case. For supporters of Nnamdi Kanu and the broader movement for Biafran independence, his trial is about much more than legal procedures. It is about recognition, dignity, and historical justice. The trial within a trial was not just a technical matter. It was seen as a test of Nigeria's commitment to the rule of law, human rights, and political fairness. As more details began to emerge, the public learned about the harsh conditions under which Nnamdi Kanu was allegedly held. Reports circulated that he had been tortured, denied food, and forced to sleep on the floor for days. These accounts added weight to the judge's decision to reject the prosecution's evidence. It is difficult to imagine that any statement made under such conditions could be considered voluntary or truthful. These revelations also reignited a larger conversation about the treatment of political prisoners in Nigeria and the extent to which the government is willing to go in order to silence dissent. The ruling also sparked debate within Nigeria's legal community. Lawyers, analysts, and human rights activists weighed in on the implications. Some praised Judge James Omotosho for upholding the law and refusing to be swayed by political pressure. Others expressed concern that the judiciary, already under immense strain, could be undermined if judges who make unpopular rulings are targeted by the government. The legal fraternity was watching closely, knowing that this case could set important precedents for how political trials are handled in the future. In the days following the ruling, attention turned back to what would happen next. Would the main trial resume? Would the government appeal the ruling or seek new evidence? Would Nnamdi Kanu be granted bail? These questions hung in the air, unanswered, and for many, the silence from the government only deepened their suspicions. Still, the mood among many supporters remained one of cautious hope. They had seen a small glimpse of justice. They had seen a judge acknowledge that what had happened was wrong, and for them, that was no small thing. It was a sign that perhaps, just perhaps, the system could work. That truth could be recognized, that human rights still mattered. As one commentator put it in response to the ruling, "No butterfly until Nnamdi Kanu is freed and compensated." That sentiment captured the prevailing mood. Yes, this was a victory. Yes, people had reason to celebrate. But the ultimate goal, the freedom of Nnamdi Kanu, his full exoneration and justice for the people he represents, was still out of reach. And so, the story continues. The court case remains open. The political context remains tense, and the supporters of Nnamdi Kanu remain watchful, determined not to let this moment of victory be the end of the story. They know that the road ahead is long. They know that powerful interests are at play. But they also know that justice, once it begins to shine through, can be a powerful force. For now, the world watches and waits. The supporters hold their breath, hoping that this legal win is not just a brief spark of hope, but the beginning of a brighter and more just chapter in the history of Nigeria and its people. The courtroom that day, located in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, was filled with tension, unease, and anticipation. Every eye was fixed on Justice James Omotosho, the presiding judge in this contentious legal battle. This case, widely known as the trial within trial, had become a symbolic centerpiece in a saga that stretches far beyond a mere courtroom verdict. It speaks to a broader story, a story about the state, the people, justice, and the struggle for identity and rights in modern Nigeria. It is important to understand what exactly this trial within trial means in legal terms. It is a special hearing within a larger trial, often requested to determine whether certain pieces of evidence, usually confessions or statements, were obtained fairly or not. The defense in this case, led by Nnamdi Kanu's legal team, argued that the statements the prosecution submitted as evidence had been made under coercion. They contended that Nnamdi Kanu was denied access to legal counsel when those statements were taken, and that he was subjected to psychological and possibly physical pressure that rendered those confessions legally inadmissible. Now, this is not a light claim. Under Nigerian and international legal standards, any statement or confession extracted without the presence of a lawyer or through intimidation, fear, or torture cannot be considered valid in court. The law is quite clear on this. A confession must be voluntary, and the person giving it must fully understand their rights. Justice James Omotosho, after reportedly taking 2 hours of deliberation, although only 1 hour was initially announced, emerged with a decision that has since been heralded as a major legal and political victory for Nnamdi Kanu. He ruled that the oral and written statements submitted by the prosecution could not be admitted into evidence because they were obtained under duress and without the presence of legal representation. This was a heavy blow to the government's case. What makes this ruling even more dramatic is the context in which it came. Nnamdi Kanu has been in detention for several years now. He is the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, also known as ipob, a movement that seeks to secure independence for the southeastern region of Nigeria. The Nigerian government considers ipob a terrorist organization, while Kanu and his supporters argue that they are fighting a peaceful political battle for self-determination and ethnic identity. His arrest, which happened in Kenya under controversial circumstances, involving what his legal team described as extraordinary rendition, a euphemism for international abduction, sparked outrage across much of southeastern Nigeria and among human rights groups internationally. Since then, his detention has been mired in allegations of poor treatment, restricted access to medical care, and violations of due process. In the hours following the ruling by Justice James Omotosho, jubilation broke out among Biafra activists and supporters. Videos shared online, particularly through platforms like YouTube, showed groups of people celebrating what they described as a rare moment of justice in a system many believe is stacked against dissenters. There were chants, dances, and flags, symbols of a deeply rooted resistance and hope that one day their demands for autonomy or justice might be realized. But even as celebrations erupted, a more cautious tone also began to take root. Some of Nnamdi Kanu's most vocal supporters, including social media commentators, political analysts, and ordinary citizens who have been following the case closely, issued warnings. They urged their fellow supporters not to get carried away, not to believe that the battle had been won in its entirety. The trial within trial might have been resolved in favor of Nnamdi Kanu, but the broader legal proceedings, the core trial itself, is still very much in progress. And then another concern began to rise, almost like a shadow behind the bright moment of victory. Why did it take the judge 2 hours instead of the scheduled 1 hour to make a decision on what seemed like a straightforward matter? Some speculated that external pressure might have been exerted on Justice Omotosho. In a country where the judiciary has often faced questions about its independence, these speculations are not uncommon. People feared that perhaps the delay was the result of behind-the-scenes negotiations or even threats. The fears grew louder when, hours after the ruling, there were no official updates about the continuation of the trial. The court remained silent, and no additional proceedings were announced. This silence, which extended well into the evening, led to speculation that Justice James Omotosho might have been reprimanded or even suspended for his decision. Supporters worried about the consequences he might face for standing his ground. Alongside this uncertainty, more details began to emerge about the conditions under which Nnamdi Kanu was being held. According to sources close to his legal team and supporters who claimed to have inside knowledge of the detention facility, he had been subjected to inhumane treatment. Reports stated that he was forced to lie on the floor for 8 consecutive days, denied basic hygiene, and provided with very little food. These conditions, if confirmed, would not only violate Nigerian law, but also international standards for the treatment of detainees. This further justified the judge's ruling, at least in the eyes of many. How could any statement taken under such conditions be regarded as reliable or truthful? Even a child, as one commentator put it, could see that these confessions were not given freely. This is the end of our news update. Please click the icon on the top right corner of your screen to watch my next video. You will enjoy it. I will see you again in my next update. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now.